All right, welcome and excited to be here this morning. I got some great panelists with me, and we're going to be talking about the rural vote and the important aspects of not forgetting the rural vote. And I have two wonderful folks who I'm becoming good friends with, and I would like them to introduce themselves more than I do. I don't do it justice, and I just got to say that I'm both very excited to have them on here. I've talked with them a little bit on other things before, and so what the knowledge they bring into this space is pretty genuine, and they just you look at people across the spectrum who excites you, and these two excite me. So I'll go first with Paulo. Do you want to? Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. We should always go ladies first.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shakia Cherry Donaldson. I'm currently in Atlanta, Georgia, but reside from the Bronx, New York. And I am the founder and executive director of 1,000 Women Strong, and we are a national constituency of Black women committed to creating the beloved community through civic and political organizing and engagement. We started a little over a year ago. We just celebrated our 1 year anniversary. And in that time, we've been able to talk to over 300,000 people across the country around issues and electoral campaigns that were pivotal to our issues this year. So that included New York City for the introduction of ranked choice voting for the first time for over 8 million voters. We targeted the important electorate of 18 to 40-year-old voters, and we're able to talk to over 50,000 folks. In Virginia, unfortunately, where we finished our year, it was not a loss, but a deep lesson in how we'll continue. And while we were able to hold some of our they're not legislators, what are they called? Delegate seats in the crucial area and the rural area of Hampton Roads, we weren't able to secure and hold the state tickets. But I know that the lessons, and honestly, the lessons around what we ignored in rural this year will galvanize folks in that state to make sure we cover everything. And then it was the pivotal work in the Georgia runoff at the top of the year, where we focused in Southwest Georgia and knocked on over 40,000 doors and contacted over 100,000 landlines because those are often forgot in the poorest and most rural part of the state. And we're able to turn out voters in numbers not only equal to Biden, but in some of those counties in even higher numbers. So all of this work with our combined focus on uplifting and amplifying issues and policies that impact us, along with the slog along with the Build Back Better bill this year, have really created an audience and a space, and I would say an energy that we're taking into next year, which frankly is all out war. I don't think any of us are going to sugarcoat that. And we have to be extremely organized and vigilant, and I think clear in our message that rural is not a second-class citizen to the Democratic electorate and to the Democratic base. And the fact is that if we're going to win in some of these key states, we have to ensure that not even so much turn out the rural vote, because that feels extraction-based, but we have to invest in rural communities to ensure that they are turning out to get the needs of their community served. Good morning.
That's fantastic. And Paulo.
Hi, how are you? My name is Paulo Cremides. I'm the executive director of the Outrun Coalition. I'm a former state party officer in New York State, whose primary goal was rural organizing. The Outrun Coalition was started by myself and 5 Democratic elected officials across upstate New York and now Pennsylvania and 4 other states that I'll name briefly. And the Outrun Coalition was really started because of a lack of response within the Democratic Party about the murder of George Floyd. And we started because as a party officer, we were being told we have to endorse these candidates that were saying things like, Black Lives Matter should be unnecessary, or that we can't endorse or condemn the murder of George Floyd in rural communities because it would not help us. And so I quit the state party. And I quit the state party because I thought that was not something that was going to be helpful. I was also the first person of color. I'm Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, who was a state party officer in my particular role in rural organizing. And I noticed that in my years in that role, I served in it for 5 years, that we were electing folks, but the folks that we were electing were winning because of who they were. And they were usually LGBTQ plus, women, people of color, young people. And we noticed that the biggest enemy within our organizing and organization was not, the Republicans. Yeah, they're a big issue, but it was also the dynamics and stereotypes that were being created in rural Democratic parties. So Outrun was created to have a conversation about diversity and increasing diversity in candidate recruitment. And we look at diversity as not just a word, but as a tool to increase candidate recruitment so that we do not have unopposed elections across America. And we started about a year ago. It's free. We don't take any money. We do this on our own time. And we recruited over 160 candidates for local office. And on Tuesday, like on November 3rd, right? 60% of our candidates won across rural communities. A lot of them ousted Republican incumbents in counties that Democrats weren't supposed to win in. And we did it by making sure that we could equip our candidates with this notion that they do not have to listen to people who are going to work as a block towards them. And that if people are unwilling to have the conversations about diversity in rural communities, we will never move forward as a party or as a country. And so we're here to expand. We're here to build. And we really want to make sure that we get the energy into the party again so that like folks like me and folks like Shakia and other folks that work in rural organizing aren't erased, because there are rural organizers of color and we need to kind of make sure that we're there and elevate ourselves, because nobody else will elevate us. And I'm here to help. Thank you.
Amen to that. And for folks who don't know who I am, my name's Janie Schulten. I ran for Congress in Iowa's 4th Congressional District in 2018 and in 2020. In 2018, the incumbent Steve King won by 20% almost every single time other than one time. Trump won this district by 27, and we ended up moving the needle 24 points, which is third most in the nation. And so we created this grassroots movement, and a lot of things that we echoed what you all are saying as well, is that I ran on who I was, not anything. I didn't fit a box or anything. This also is a district that is arm's length from Des Moines, which is an arm's length from DC. Nobody in the party really gave a crap about the district, to be honest, and we organized. And I remember when I decided to run again in 2020, I went out to DC and had this was in this meeting on for candidates, a candidate training thing, and talked about diversity on your staff. And I was like, I was in a district that nobody cared about, and I had people from all different backgrounds. I had we had Latino organizers on the ground. We had people of color. We had just all this. We had a Republican who was an organizer who hated Steve King, and it just, you take people and you just use the best, like you use them, put them in a place that they have a chance to succeed. And when you have that, and you have all these passionate people working together, believing in a cause, you can do something special. And so anybody who, and for the last 4 or 5 years now that I've been politically engaged, I also like, rural is not that white farmer, at least in the Midwest. It's not just that white farmer. We're the district I ran in is Iowa's 4th Congressional District, and we're the second most agriculture producing district in America. Yet there are more people who work at Dollar General and Walmart than that farm. So, but when we have the caucus and the Iowa caucus and all these presidential candidates come here, they want to talk about ethanol in rural spaces when we can just talk about the same things we talk about in Atlanta, in New York, in Pennsylvania, everywhere. We that message. And so I'm very excited to have you on here. I think right before we came on, Paulo made a suggestion. I think we should, especially talking about rural communities and how they when times are tough, they stick together. I think we're going to do a short little moment of silence for the victims and the people affected by the tornadoes last night. Not only in Kentucky, but across down through Arkansas as well. And so we're just going to do a short little moment of silence for them. All right. It's we um, I think one of the things that I guess I want to pose this first question. Uh, we have oh good we have we're going to be joined here, perfect timing actually, because we were just finishing up with introductions. Janie, welcome. Can you hear us, and do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Yat A, Janie Parrish and Chat, the Bedlish in the Shla, Sheen, Bushashin, not kind that in the Shache, Twitch, Ini, and the Shanala. And I like to do that just because, one, I know there's probably not a lot of Navajo people on the call, but you guys get a chance to hear my language, the language that we speak regularly out here. And apologies for just jumping on. But I am currently, let me go back. I'm Janie Parrish, and what I told you was just my clans and my culture, my language. And that's how we identify ourselves. Yes, there's names, but clans are the first thing that we do to introduce ourselves when we're in our community because it connects us to everybody else. But I am currently the executive director of the Navajo County Democrats here in Arizona, and we are in the northeastern part of Arizona, although, of course, it stretches from the north to about mid part of the state. But our region that we cover is all of northeast Arizona, which is predominantly where all of the tribes are in currently congressional district one. It's under redistricting now, but we have about 13 tribal nations within this congressional district. And then, of course, we're also in legislative state district 6 and 7 in our area. But yeah, we cover a lot of rural and tribal areas in Arizona. So that's a bit synopsis of what I do now. But thanks to Jess, I was recruited by her because she was one of my colleagues, alumni at Emily's List. And prior to that, I've had a couple years of experience in campaign and issue advocacy, but being a Native woman, I didn't really see a lot of other people like me in these spaces. So I've worked with a lot of groups to really emphasize that point of diversifying, truly and genuinely diversifying these spaces of advocacy, organizing, and campaigning.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm very excited to hear more about what you guys are doing. I think the first question I want to open it up to is, um, I mean, I think a lot of spotlight has been put on rural after Virginia. I know a lot of us have been like waving our arms for months, years, what have you, about the Democratic Party not doing what they need to do in some of these areas. And I think often for what I try to tell folks is like, I'm here. Like, if you want change in the party, you are the change. So go do it. And so in Iowa, we've seen this shift from a proudly purple state to a red state. I guess, and because we have the caucus, we get more notoriety in this. But when we talk about the rural vote, I would like for each of you kind of to talk about a little bit about kind of what we've seen happen and what we see where it's going in your neck of the woods and everything. And so we'll start off with Shakia.
Okay. So we're deep in strategy right now to look to next year. And we know we're going to cover 7 states. We have 6 of them picked out, all of them with rural, including Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York. Focus on upstate New York. We did the city this year, but we're going upstate for next year statewide. So in all the, I sit at the tables. I have the legal conversations we're able to have with the party, and no one is talking seriously about rural except the couple of rural groups in the room. And me and JD have had this conversation because I've worked for all the entities, right? Like for PACs, for C4s, for the party. Like, I've collected checks from everyone on the progressive side. But the reality is that if all of our collective might of every rural group I've ever met, of everybody that JD has building this amazing national coalition, even if we call every donor we have, everything you guys do on the call, it's so everything, we are not going to out fundraise the party. We are not going to raise more money than the Democratic Party and its entities, including the DSCC, the DCCC, and the National Governance Association. Their combined efforts in terms of actual dollars and infrastructure, we are fighting hard out there in real time, but we do not have that. And I think one of the things I'm pushing back against versus 2020, because 2020's attitude felt like, oh, well, we just got to get it done. The party's not acting right. The party's not acting right in my state. We just got to get it done. We just got to get it done. We just got to get it done. But my pushback going into next year is we cannot do this without like some clear cooperation and some clear promises around infrastructure and investment. And because that's just the truth. And I'm curious about how, like, what not the verbal and not the messaging response is going to be to Virginia, because again, in the coordinated, when they opened up, the spreadsheet to figure out who's where, who's covering what, nobody had rural, and I could not get funded to do rural. And now it's the big story. So something has got to add up. And I'm not saying give me all the money. I mean, I need to fundraise. Go to 1kstrong.com. Like, I have to fundraise. Everybody on this call has got to raise funds and resources to get the work done. So, but I'm genuinely saying, if we're not manning the rural desk, if the states that we know that these big, large institutions are going to play in are not funding rural organizations and rural individuals on the ground to do the work in their community, we're not going to win. Michigan can't win with a 15-county strategy. It's a setup. And so I'm just like, from the position I sit, from the allies I am creating, we cannot let this go unchecked. It can't go, well, we'll just do whatever we have to do. We just do whatever we have to do, because we're running on a hamster wheel. So that's like my big pushback. I mean, I hear the spin around the increase of white women vote in Virginia. I hear the spin about critical race theory, but real hard numbers. The difference between 2020 and 2021, the Democratic vote dropped from 2020 to 2021 by 35%. Our turnout rate dropped. The Republican turnout rate from 2020 to 2021 only dropped 15%. That's turnout. That's engagement. That's investment. That is nothing that they did. That's on us. And we have to figure out a way to correct it. So.
You mean a 30-second ad won't correct it? Sorry. Paulo, do you want to chime in here?
Sure. So just to piggyback, not to piggyback, I hate using the word piggyback, and also you're from Iowa, which is funny because we're going to talk about pigs. But we piggyback off of what Shakia was saying. So the conversation about BIB and BBB, and this is something that I heard Cornell Belcher said that I thought was really useful. People don't want to vote for a bridge. Like, a bridge is great. A bridge is amazing, and so are roads, right? And my home county of Chemung, right? My downtown, they're going to vote for the lights, right? But people want to vote for candidates that inspire people. And unfortunately, in the context where we've seen conversations in rural communities, we usually get the same situation, and I'm sick and tired of this, of people being asked to run at the last moment, being asked to run for state house and then being switched over to run for state senate, being asked to run in July when the election is in November and then not launching the campaign until September. People not using Van, not wanting to figure out what a win number is. And the same, and I'm just going to curse once here, and I'm sorry. The same bullshit about, well, this is the way we've done things here. We actually ran the numbers. The average county committee member in a rural county Democratic Party across the country, and they're mostly white and they're mostly older. And what does that bring? It brings a bias. And let's be honest here, because we have to talk about it, right? It brings a bias about who gets to run for office based on the mentality of that person. And I tweeted this the other day, like, cycle here. These folks come in and they say, well, this is the way we've done things. This is the way we run people, because they don't know how to message to anyone else. But if you go to a rural community like my home county of Chemung, you'll have a county Democratic committee person say, this is a very good, and they'll be in a town that Joe Biden won. And they'll have this mentality that because Trump voters are very loud, that that's not a place that Joe Biden won, or that there's no diversity in these communities. I was at Panera Bread the other day, and I was looking around at Chemung County, and it was all 20-somethings. Some of those folks are LGBTQ plus and people of color. And I was asking myself, like, what is this divide that's happening within the party where these folks aren't being reached out to? And growing up, working with the steel workers and working on the Hill, and diversity wasn't something that we were taught to talk about in rural communities, because I think a lot of Democratic staffers thought that rural communities weren't going to change. They were going to be the same, and they're changing. And if we acknowledge that and use that to find inspirational candidates to run for local office in 2022, we can change the dynamic. Because JD, I'm pretty sure that in some of your counties, there were local elected officials that were unopposed, that could have been opposed. And I know in Texas, particularly when the blackout happened in East Texas, and one of the trainings we did, we had county chairs saying, well, we wish we could have had some county commissioners to come out against Greg Abbott and say, hey, like, this is wrong. We need our help in these communities. And that's what we need to do. Like, the strongest pillar in a rural community, yeah, sure, congressional candidates, state legislative candidates, that's great. But a village trustee or a county legislator who can be the voice locally and can inspire people to mobilize people, that's what helps rural Democrats outrun the top of the ticket. And that's why we're called Outrun, because everyone knows that in rural communities, we're going to have to outrun Biden no matter what. But finding inspirational candidates for 2022 by utilizing diversity for candidate recruitment, by stopping people from saying, like, you don't have enough experience, or saying, well, this is a 90% white county, why would you be able to run here? Ending those tropes. And and in Democratic organizing, I have not seen any other space where it is normal to do that, to be able to invoke racial tropes against candidates that way, except in rural organizing. And once we can overcome that, we can win. And we've shown that. And our elected officials have shown that. I mean, my friend Giancarlo Yaverius in Dutchess County, he's now the only Democratic elected official in his town. And he's a guy who was a former gang member. He's a fry cook. And, when he ran for office, the county Democratic Party had the audacity to tell him to cut off his hair. That's the sort of thing that we need to stop fighting, and we need to allow people to be themselves. So if we are able to run candidates who are useful and who are local and who can inspire and show that they've overcome adversity, we're unbeatable. So I hope that answers the question.
No, absolutely. And Janie, would you like to talk a little bit about kind of where you're from, what you've seen, and just kind of bring us up to date with where
Sure.
Politics are at right now?
Okay. Well, I want to definitely echo the money situation and investment, because that's huge. So I won't cover that because I think you did a really great job on that. But that's our, like, probably 80%, 70 to 80% of our battle. And Paulo, thank you for that, about what is rural Arizona, even, because, well, let me explain a little. So not only do we work in Navajo County, but we really have a cross coalition effort with Apache County and Coconino County and parts of Gila and Graham in our state. I wish I had the map up. But this is also where the tribes are concentrated. And so we battle the racism of border towns with the white folks. But the thing about our situation is they're afraid of us because we dominate the vote. And we showed that in 2020. So we vote in blocks, like many other, well, not many, but several other communities of color that are very similar in our voting habits and just our values that are closely aligned mainly. But so when we have like a large concentration created area, like my tribe, Navajo Nation, I grew up on Navajo, Window Rock, and Kanta, and I seriously didn't come across too many other people of races in when I was growing up. I mean, that still happened in the 80s and 90s, and I mean, the kids that were there were like the doctors' kids or the teachers' kids that were coming in to work with tribes, you know. And it wasn't until way later, high school, college, that you saw that I got to get out of that great environment of growing up with only like just only other tribes and only other Navajo. And so, um, you know, I didn't experience that full frontal racism. It was still there, but like my colleagues and counterparts that are in the border towns, which border the tribal lands, that is obviously where our big challenging areas are, because that's the very Trump areas. And if I had the map, I could show you on an I-40 corridor that everything pretty much north is that blue section everybody saw on our maps last year where tribes are. And then anything kind of a little bit south of that was red, and you got to see the voting blocks. But in some of those areas, you'll have tribes that are not as heavily populated as ours. So they are a smaller tribal group, but they are right up against those red areas. And so that's been long-standing contention since forever. And we know why we have these challenges. It's because we're communities of color, and these systems weren't built for us. They were built to exclude us for a very long time. And the way that I've seen it since 2020 and any times before, when we make gains, people want to change the rules. And because we do it well, you know, our people we show up in blocks, and like, we gotta figure this out. And we saw that with the onslaught of voter suppression bills coming through, targeting our communities. And then also coupled that with not as much investment, being like, oh, you guys got it, you know, you guys are going to show up consistently, coupled with the uniqueness of areas where we have to old school organize, not a lot with technology in some cases, because we have little to no internet. I mean, luckily where I'm at right now, I have good internet, but our strong voting block is older folks, and they're not going to be on the internet on their computers. Although we have seen a rise in younger folks. So we have all those challenges as well, except that the uniqueness for us is, I guess in some ways too, is when we do have Native candidates, you know, far and few between, but our folks will show up and support that person because of this. I mean, there's tension obviously for a long time, not just this year. It's generational fights of not only voting rights but everything else that we have to constantly, because tribes, you know, we're the third part of government that a lot of people know or understand, in addition to state and federal. So we are in a position where we have that government to government relationship with tribes, and we also wield a big economic power because we don't have a lot of the Targets and the Walmarts in our area. Where do we go? We go to those border towns. And so the money talks in a lot of those spaces, but there's still that tension, and more of our folks are moving into the border towns, or have been, because of school, work, and other things. However, there's still a clear divide in a lot of communities. So communication is very important for us, but it's also the way that we say it. So there's one thing about inspiring and investment, and we're still young, I would say, in our feet to do this, because if we're all talking about county party groups, I had no idea about county Democratic Party groups until I was asked to come home by my mentors and elders to say, hey, we know you have some experience. We need you to help bring out the Native vote. Will you work with this team? And it was, you know, 2-3 people usually on the day to day. And that's that capacity. And I came from an organization very, you know, progressive, that had that years of investment and had a structure. I learned a lot, thankfully, and I could bring some of that. But I was like, wow, all right, this really is that grassroots, bringing it to the level. But I don't want to take up too much of the time, but it's battling the state who should be there. It's battling those coordinated, but we're trying to find inroads, because what we found in this year, though, is that even though all of our struggles, and our budget was like only $450,000, because we hire locally, and all the things that you learn in regular campaign world just does not apply. And but our foundation, our heart, are always the people, are always the organizers, because they speak the language. They know, we know all of this, who's the best people to organize their own communities. So I won't get into that with y'all too much, but I think one of the greatest things we were able to do was show that through a lot of story form. And our biggest support did not always come from what you would think our circles should be. It came from outside, where people saw our potential and knew us. And I think that investment part, where some of them we still have to this day, are like, hey, we see you, we see what you're doing, and we're happy to give, because your win is our win, and we need to remember that. So that's just some things, but we'll get into other details later on. But I'm just really excited to hear this, because we don't always get this. And I got in trouble last year when I called out certain parts of the party. And I was like, hey, I am frustrated fighting tooth and nail, but this is about our people, and it's voter focused. There's a candidate, there's another white guy who will come every now and again, but we're trying to build something more than that. We want more Native women. And now that we see more Native candidates in office, especially at higher levels, people see that and they're like, hey, I could do that too. And I always use Sharice Davids as an example, because as a Native woman, and there's plenty of great examples of women or men that are in these really rural conservative areas that pull out all of the vote. And we have that, of course, in certain communities here in Arizona as well. So, and I'm very happy to say about Judy Begay and Flagstaff, but that's another story. We have a lot of those stories when we know, and it's this perception of who's the right fit, like you said, right? And there's no right fit when people are afraid to pick someone that's not the typical old white guy. So that's our work. Anyway, I'll leave it there and we'll continue more. Thank you so much.
JD, could I just say something real quick about fundraising, if that's okay? So I have the pleasure, I don't know if it's pleasure, but I get the pleasure of putting up with New York City liberals for half of the month, in that I live in Brooklyn. And one thing, like in the conversation about investment that I've seen is like, when I was a state party chair, rural organizer, I was a young Democrats chair in the rural caucus. We've raised $200,000 for upstate New York State Senate and congressional candidates. The money's there. The way that like the party does the outreach is not working because, and I'll give you an example. There's an older gentleman named Bill Samuels, a multi-bajillionaire guy in Manhattan, very progressive and stuff. We were able to engage with him, not because of, he's a Democratic donor, but because he's from Pittsford, New York, a small town in upstate New York. And one thing that we realized, and this is something that we're working on now, is when we build like lists of donors, progressive donors that are not based on, you're a progressive, you're a Democrat or something, because those people will give the Lincoln Project or whatever, which we can talk about that another time. But if we can get folks who are from small towns in West Virginia, in Texas, in North Carolina, in Iowa, in Arizona, who are from those communities, who made it to New York City, a guy like me can engage in a place like the Manhattan Young Democrats or, Brooklyn Democratic Club or something, and we can connect with those folks. Those folks will give resources to candidates and stuff like that are able to run in rural communities because they want to give back to their communities. A lot of the times these folks, they're here, but they're here because of a job, and it's not because they wanted to leave. And I think that that's like a big funding source that we don't really like look at as a party. Thanks.
I think that's exactly right. And that's, I think, one of the things we're trying to build at ruralvote.org. And for folks, I guess I didn't mention this at the beginning. I mentioned about my congressional campaigns, but I'm the executive director of ruralvote.org. I'm also a senior advisor at the American Economic Liberties Project, which is we're an antitrust group. But I think that is right. And I think one of the things we're seeing a lot too is people who don't live here are making decisions about us without us being involved. And it's getting more and more frustrating and just it's one of those things where Shakila was part of our group, and Paulo, you were there too. We had this national rural strategy session, and as an outcome of it, I had all these groups want our memo from it to take it so they can go and fundraise or get donors to do a study off of something when we're doing work on this. And it's just kind of it's to me, it's there's a lot of folks out here who are the network's not built. Uh, and I think a lot of people have good intentions on what we're trying to do, but there's a lot of people who are doing great work who live in these communities, in our communities, and so that doesn't. I think you're exactly right on the funding part. I think there's a lot more I could go into. I want to transition just into a couple things, and we have questions. If you have questions, I want to say hi to Luke. See, we'll get to your question here shortly. Um, put them in. We'll get to them. But before we do, I want to talk about. I know there's a lot of people who walk in politics, work in or want to. How would you train somebody to, if there was a group like a statewide group and that had brought you in to talk about how to engage voters or whatever you specialize in, how would you go about doing that? And I'll start. Shakia, we'll start with you.
Can you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, no problem. It's if you were to train like a statewide, hypothetically, a candidate, they have money, they're like, how do we engage with rural voters, and like why? Why should I engage?
If you want to win and you want to have, I'll answer the last question first. The reason statewide candidates, no matter what seat, should engage with rural voters from the very beginning is because they are, in fact, a part of a path to a winning strategy always. Excluding rural voters only narrows your pathway. So they are always a part of a winning strategy. The second reason is that when you govern, in whatever elected office you win after these people come out and vote for you, you want a true and genuine feedback loop from various parts of the state so that your only perspective is not coming out of the Capitol or is not coming out of political figures, but that you as an elected are building genuine relationships with all the constituencies that you will serve. So that's the why. The how. The how I actually think is sort of kind of easy too. And I have to say, because it would be hypocritical of me. I've been an organizer since I was 19. I've worked 23 states. My focus for the last 10 years has been primarily rural states and rural areas because that's what I'm good at. Why is that part of what I'm good at? Because I'm a first generation New Yorker. My mom and my grandmama were born in Scotland Neck, North Carolina, and Halifax County, which is rural. So when we went home to Scotland Neck. So that's a personal experience that made me good for this work. The best way to hire and train rural organizers is to go into rural spaces and then teach them the skills. So one of the things I've always pledged is, whether it was Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, anywhere, is that one of the people I'm hiring, I'm training up. They're going to know van. They're going to know how to cut turf. They're going to understand, like, let me show you. Here, come in. Let me show you real quick. Because win, lose, or draw, when I leave, when the election is over, we have to leave institutional knowledge and institutional resources. That is a level of investment. It's not just about paying someone to be there to do the job, but it is about creating a pathway and a pipeline for the information and the knowledge to get out to community. Whether it is 3 weeks before an election cycle or a big countywide meeting that everybody needs to show up for because they're trying to push some crazy vote, like, we have to start building a civic and community engagement 365. And so, yeah, I just think our pledge, like, one of our 3 pillars is hire local. And if, nobody knows Van, and this is Central, and this is Southwest, and nobody knows, okay, then then let's teach them. So now they know. Before I helicopter a bunch of organizers from PA, like what sense did that make? That are all gonna leave. That nobody has ties. That nobody knows the lingo. That nobody knows the draw. Like why? Why is that where my investment is? Why do I think those people can win better than the people here? Because they don't know Van. I could teach them Van. So that's the why and how, and in my humble opinion.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Janie, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm loving all this good morning energy. All right. I'm speaking to my community here. So a big part of that in terms of why, I mean, I'm not going to echo it because that's exactly what we say is we're a voting block. If you want to win, you gotta engage. And I think the biggest thing though that we were able to teach others last year, because we were this scrappy little group on a shoestring budget, but we had impactful people and we got to get it done because nobody else was doing anything and we couldn't wait. And we were a group that could maneuver and make decisions and do things without saying, oh, wait, let me check, let me see what's going on. And I think that comes from our core group of board folks and us, where we really wanted to see different behavior than what we were seeing, which was year-round engagement, like we said, 365. And we were going to figure out a way to do that. And we've seen too many people coming in 2-3 months before an election, and we didn't want that anymore. We said, yes, it's about the candidate. It's important about getting Democrats elected, but that's only part of the job. It's really being invested locally and showing that. So when it came to things like when the pandemic hit, it was forget about voting an election right now. It was PPE, delivering water, everything we need to do, and then feel the ground in our folks and maybe transition back at this point in time to do that. But now, and we also made those changes with people because, yeah, the people that were active in Navajo County were pretty much older, white, retired folks in the beginning. And thankful to them, though, that they raised money to hire folks to be like, hey, Janie, like me, Janie, can you come on and do this? But the goal was always to get more Native people on the board so that it's more reflective of the county. And so we made those changes where all but 2 right now are Native people. And so it was also, again, the same concept of training, because I've seen that as well. And I said, no, the reason I like this work was because I found something that I could connect to, and I wanted to work in my rural tribal communities to do that. And there was nobody else doing this work. We know what organizing is. We've been doing it for millennia with our ceremonies and our families. And that's not the new information. The new information is the actual technical stuff, skills. So we have that relational organizing stuff down because we're community folk, but it's those skills. So I would have to say those are big things for us, is really also making a humane campaign, which I love because our chair right now, she's worked on several, she's good, very kind, the white lady that came to tribal areas, but she knew her place. She knew like what to not do. She came from rural Michigan and settled here, and her doctor works with tribes up in White Mountain Apache land. And she saw immediately how the different behavior of tribal and non-tribal communities interacted. And so she was like, I'm not about that. I'm here and she understands the concept of being an ally. So I don't have to like say anything. She already, like, she knows, she's always learning. So it's helpful to have people like that who are all about trying to grow these spaces and not about them per se. And this humane campaign translates from her, from me, from other folks to be like, we're not going to burn you out, because we've all been through that, where you chew us up and spit us out. How come you haven't made your 1,050 phone call today? Or and like I said, a lot of the tactics just don't work similarly because we have to drive a lot of places. It's not on a grid in a lot of communities. So cutting turf is not going to be the same thing what you do in Phoenix, Maricopa County than you do in northeastern Arizona and Hopi and Navajo areas. So, it's what we come back to is that always with our organizers is one, giving them a real chance and a real shot, because we know a lot of people get looked over for a variety of reasons. But like we had Sandra, for example, I always love Sandra, in that border town that was critical for a border town that is still critical for us. But she was the burrito lady. Everybody knew her because she had the best food. But when pandemic hit, and a lot of our folks in these areas are already in economically depressed areas, so we don't ask them to volunteer because they can't. So we do what we can and pay them and support them, get them what they need to be successful. And so Sandra was out of a job like many others. We're like, we need Sandra. I wonder if she's willing to help us out. Man, she would constantly bring in the highest registration numbers because everybody knew her. Everybody knew Sandra the burrito lady. And she already had her customer service skills already. And so, like someone would probably look at her and just automatically discount her because she didn't have campaign experience or whatever. But we were like, no, she knows community. And it was like that because there was a young man similarly with another campaign. I won't say who, but they have a very rigorous background check, which is important. I'm all for that. But at the same time, you're going to get a lot of our folks in our community that may not have their driver's license, or maybe they have a DUI or something going on in their background, and they're just going to maybe overlook that. And we're like, no, this is community. This is our people. This is who we have to bring along. And if we want to change any of this, they have to be a part of it. We have to welcome it and figure out a way, because most of our people are incarcerated, our communities of color, and we got to get to the realness of things. And I think that's the beauty of us, of what I'm hearing from the groups, is where we can really be truthful about the issues that are just not sugar coated, and we can see the real impacts in our families and our communities, because we didn't come from a lot of these spaces to be born into, or privilege or money. And like I said, I always tell people I didn't vote until I was probably in my late 20s, because one, tribes, we already have a difficult relationship with the government for obvious reasons, but it's not like it didn't not phase me to be involved. I was always about community. It just wasn't in the form of electing more white guys, because I just like, that's for the white people over there. That's what they do. And it wasn't until I finally, for me, I had to have that real personal connection to the policies, the laws, and I knew them, but it was finally putting them and feeling them to be like, hey, that whole thing without us, about us, without us, it's very evident when you have those real conversations about things like missing and murdered Indigenous women. Who's making these laws? Who's making the policies? We have family and friends who were, and it gets to that real part when they make that connection. And so I think that that's when you talk about engagement, that's the conversations we have, realness with our folks on the ground. We don't sugarcoat anything. We don't give the same stump speeches. It's like, we know it's messed up, but what can we do to change it? And when we start talking to them about, again, organizing, what do they care about, what's impactful, and if there's a candidate that can then speak to those things, all the better. But again, it's about the issues, and we're emphasizing to organizers now that you may or may not work in other election campaigns, but you have the skills to make the changes needed already. So whether you run for office or not, and so I think that that's a lot of my speaking. So I'll stop there. But thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Paulo, do you want
to? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it was to talk about staff and what advice you would give to them to let them know about why rural votes and yeah.
Well, to piggyback again off what Shakia was saying, I would always hire local. I think any consultant that says, and I've had this told to me multiple times, a certain woman of color who's a state senator now ran for state senate in the Rochester area in upstate New York. And they're like super progressive consultant came in and was like, well, Ontario County is only 8,000 votes. Why does it matter? And then you look at election night and see this person having to struggle, climb up to win the election in a district that Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama won by double digits, but that the Republicans had held for 60 years. And you play those words back in your head. Well, there's only so many votes, so why does it matter? You have to come in and say, within rural organizing and the money and the effort that we could put in, and I have myself has put in as a former state party officer in fundraising and stuff, I'm done putting up with these consultants. I'm making sure that when we do hire staff, that we do put someone that is competent on top of that conversation. Because oftentimes what we'll have is, and in New York State and other states that have like the heavy Democratic machines, Shakia should know this too, they'll put in people who are very incompetent. I can give you examples of folks who are tied to the machine or the former machine of a certain congressman who got defeated by AOC, who served on the board of the state Young Democrats with me, who didn't know that there were local elections outside of New York City, in upstate New York in the same year that there were local elections in New York City. And these are folks who are influencing the conversation about donors, right? So the thing that I would say when we talk about hiring local staff is not only just hire local, but instill this notion of rural consciousness in them. That when we hire local, we're talking about things that affect our communities in a way that we know that affect them. And also hire folks who are new Americans. I'm a first-generation Peruvian American immigrant. I came to America when I was 7. People in my hometown, they called me Paul. And they called me Paul not because of a thing that they didn't want to pronounce. They didn't know how to pronounce my name until I taught them. But what that shows is that I was able to teach someone to love me before they could even pronounce my name. And finding candidates that can do that, that is how you win votes. Somebody could vote for Donald Trump or something, but if they know you and they know how to pronounce your name, one of my best friends is a conservative talk show host. We got him to turn on immigration reform in my hometown because he knew me. And that's the conversation that needs to happen. And making sure that in the context of your state Democratic Party or your local Democratic Party, the young progressive voices, that we are able to elevate them, and then we're also able to take up space in these spaces is an important thing. So it's one thing, we can get an intern, we can teach them how to use Van and stuff, but we need to teach them the history of rural organizing within Democratic Party spaces. And honestly, in a way, one thing that I've realized is that a lot of the conversation about rural organizing, the pivots that happen is people will talk, we need to abolish the Senate, or all this stuff. And what that does is it takes away the ability for us to retool messaging in rural communities, and it takes away our ability for young people in our communities to talk about them, because we're always put as the other, whether you're white, black, brown, LGBTQ plus woman, or anything like that. There is this idea that rural communities are just always conservative, and that they're just going to be that way. And changing that dynamic and showing a young person that we can do that. Changes things. And I'll just end up with one anecdote. One of my favorite candidates was this guy named Nate Shinagawa. He was a Japanese American county legislator in my home district in New York 23rd. In 2012, he came within 2 points of defeating our Republican Congressman Tom Reed. And he did it as open. They ran ads against him, in a district of lots of World War II veterans at the time, of being a Japanese menace and all this stuff. And we almost ousted a Republican congressman, and he did it by being himself. And ever since that election, no Democrat has come within 10 points of ousting our Republican Congressman Tom Reed. And that says something about rural communities and their ability to accept people. And it's something that I think we need to instill in the next generation. And finally, the last thing that I would say is, if you do have outside organizers coming in, I think the one thing that we need to tell people is that, not everyone is as woke as you are. Not everyone's going to be in DSA. Not everybody's going to join these organizations. And, I think one of the things that was most painful for me in this cycle was watching the Democratic Socialists of America try to do this thing where they were like, we're going to run somebody outside of New York City. And in a district that had been affected heavily by dairy farmer suicides, but they could not bring themselves to condemn the economic struggles of dairy farmers because, there are people in those organizations that think that farms are capitalist entities and that that's something that cannot exist in the context of family farms or something. And they couldn't condemn dairy farmer suicides because they thought that that farming is only capitalism and all these things. And that's how we lose. when we bring in people from Brooklyn and stuff that want to say stuff like that and talk on our behalf, and I'm just not going to have it. I know that might be controversial, but it's true. We got to talk about it. Like, there are white socialists that are kind of ruining our ability to run in rural communities.
Going and switching to issues, Luke has a good question here. Obviously, rural New York, Arizona, Georgia, and Iowa are very different. It's clear who the candidate is matters, but what issues do you find resonate with most in your respective areas? And are there still any so-called third rail issues? Does anybody want to take a first crack at it?
I always find this question interesting because I can't for the life, other than geographic proximity and maybe like just experience, but like everything that happens in any other part of the country happens in rural America. So when you talk about, I mean, this is, Paulo talked about the BBB and BIB, like, and just how that imploded on us. But like, but when you talk about childcare, when you talk about transportation, when you talk about housing costs, when you talk about job wages and opportunities, it is the same issues in rural communities. Now, this is where Paulo and I think all of us completely agree. How and who is talking about it to rural communities is I feel like the underlining thing that we keep like emphasizing, not the what, because it's the same what. It's the same what. It's just, yes, we have to acknowledge, right? Like, you have to acknowledge, right? Like, who is there? Who, you have to see whole people. And we have allowed, I would argue, a communications and media machine to define rural. And so if we don't allow ourselves to break out of what that definition is by every example that the four of us have brought up today about that rural is diverse, rural doesn't look different everywhere. Rural is very much farming and and we're not having that honest conversation and push. And again, my big thing is, everybody, if you know somebody at the Democratic Party, call them and tell them about this conversation, because we will all do the work next year. We all have big plans in order to get the work done. But if we are not pushing back and demanding more of our institutions, we will always fail. Period. So it's the same issue. I think it's the same issues. I want somebody local or somebody from that state or somebody who knows to be producing that local commercial and including like the everybody's favorite burrito shop, because people will know.
Yes.
As opposed to bringing in somebody who doesn't know and including the state capital. People don't identify with that. But everybody knows their Cheers. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So like, why are we, I feel like we compound a very hard issue with trying to fix it with a very neat solution. And there's no one solution. The solution is we have to disrupt what we've been doing to allow something new.
If I could jump in here. Oh, I'm sorry, JD. Okay. So we're not just active in upstate New York. So let me go back on that. We're in upstate New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, and Nebraska now. So 5 states. And the one thing that we've seen is, yeah, sure, we can talk about local issues, but one thing that's been pretty unanimously clear is that the reason why we do these trainings is because diversity is something that we need to talk about in rural communities. Right. And yeah, there are third rail issues that we could talk about. There are, fracking in upstate New York. I chained myself to a large composite thing that was like trying to extract gas across the Pennsylvania border, was polluting a river. Those things exist. But unless we have a messenger that makes sense and can actually push that message forward that's local, we're not going to move forward. And often that messenger doesn't have to be a hoity-toity lawyer that makes 6 figures or a doctor or something. It has to be a local young person. And it could be somebody who works at McDonald's or works at Starbucks or works at the local coffee shop. And that to me, like, third rail issues is secondary to the conversation about diversity in candidate recruitment, because honestly, in some places, and I hate to say this, but, New York State's first Black county executive was a Republican. There are, in places across the country, Republicans are much better in being able to recruit diverse candidates than we are. And I could give you an example about Indiana, right? Indiana's 5th congressional district. The race was a Ukrainian American anti-communist refugee who's a Republican named Victoria Sparks versus a state representative named Christina Hale. Who won that race? The Ukrainian American refugee. And because they were able to kind of communicate the notion of values and what it meant to be an American or something. And no one can do that better than new Americans. No one can do that better than like somebody who's had to, fight to get citizenship or something, and who's proud to become a member of this country. And that I don't think is like something that Democrats really take into account a lot when they do candidate recruitment. So, when it comes to like third rail issues, it's more important of who's the messenger and stuff.
Can I chime in really quickly too with the story? You guys got me thinking. So I just told a story actually 2 days ago with a group because, yes, we're a core Native Indigenous group, but of course, I think what makes our team work so well in this large, vast area is obviously our volunteers that are non-Native, our other team members that are non-Native, that understand and worked in tribal communities, lived in tribal communities as well, or on the border towns. And it's funny because this category of rural, we've had to really battle it with redistricting because all the Trump white people came up and, spouting their business about stuff, and our white district, our Republican, our lands. And as tribes, we're all sitting there like just cracking up and smiling. We're like, who are these people that just came in when we've been here 10,000 years plus? And so, trying to squeeze this out. But it's interesting because our allies and our partners that work with us, it was a beautiful sight to see when you had tribal nations all speak up about the certain issue on redistricting. And then you had all of our allies that were white or, just not tribal that would step up. And I'm here to support the Navajo Nation and the White Mountain Apache tribe. Thank you for hosting us on your lands. And it was really great to see that dichotomy. And for me, that's what we define as rural Arizona is like, yes, there's a lot of divisiveness and isolation in a lot of communities, but what was happening is the beauty of what makes things work and what bring people back to humanity. But also it's really hard to talk about these things because we are rural people. We are rural Arizona too. And I always say that because the ranch life, the cowboy, the raising the sheep, the animals, hauling wood, water, welding, like all of that is definitely part of what people might consider country rural white life, but that's very much indigenous way of living off the land and life. And so that brings us our commonality of fighting for things like water, and all of that stuff, and traveling far distances, 2 hours to get to your polling location or whatever. And so those are our underlying issues. And like right now, we were talking about Las Vegas because it's where the national finals rodeo is happening. And usually it's like all cowboy Christmas and people are like, oh, it's white people. Well, you know what? There's a bunch of Indians over there because they're all cowboy people too, cowgirls, and they're cattle ranchers. And so, but because we're Native, we vote Democrat. But it's a very interesting interaction with this, as you can see where I'm going, this really Republican conservative type setting. But then you have a bunch of Native Indigenous people from all over that are very strong Democrats that also live this life, but they find a way to coexist and lead because of that commonality. And so, that's a way that we describe what happens too in our area. But I think a lot of what we're able to show is we definitely become a model for different people to learn from. So I'm happy about that. They have a lot to learn from us. And when we want to engage people, we definitely have to do a lot of cultural competency training first before they start reaching out to certain communities. But that's it.
I wanted to just tell one story. When I first ran, the congressman was Steve King, who, for folks who may not know, he tweeted out, "We can't restore our civilizations with other people's babies. tweeted out diversity is not our strength, got stripped of his committees because he said, when did white nationalism and white supremacy become a derogatory term? So, I mean, you get kind of who he is. I was told, so when I ran, nobody asked me to run. At the time, I didn't think anybody was going to run in this district. We launched very humbly. And at the very beginning, I just reached out to everybody, and they're like, if they knew anybody who could help out. And I had a friend who was a consultant, and I just had a phone call with this person. I can't even remember who it was, to be honest, but they're just talking about issues, what you should talk about, what you shouldn't talk about. And they said, well, in your district, you shouldn't talk about immigration. And I remember having this moment, and there was an awful situation where there was an immigrant worker who killed somebody in Iowa, and it was very publicized. And right after that, I went to this meeting, very rural meeting. It was pretty much grain elevators. That was the main part of who the folks were there. I was probably one of maybe two Democrats in the entire room, and I was the last person to go and the only person to get asked a question. And my first question was, what was my stance on immigration? And at that moment, I was like, you know what, I could back away and give some just like some very basic, like just talking points and get over it and get done. Where I could stand up with saying like why it is important for a district like ours. You see that the majority of the communities that have declined, and every place I go to, one of the first things that gets talked about is the lack of workforce, and talk about how the immigrant workforce is one of the few things that are keeping our rural communities alive in a lot of places. And I saw a lot of heads nod, and I realized at that moment is like, if you just go and play afraid and not stand for who you are, like, why are you in politics? Why are you why are you running for office? And that, I will never forget that moment. And I will never forget the moment after 2018 when I had a group of Republican women email me, say, thank you for talking about equal pay. Thank you for talking about childcare. These are all things that we uh, are not brought up. And so it's, you never know who you can impact when you talk about what you're for. We have about 5 minutes here to go. I would like to wrap things up. Paula, do you have something though? Did you want to say?
I just want to shout you out, because when I first met you, like I've had experiences of like rural congressional candidates being like, wait, you're a rural organizer. Like, what are you doing? How are you Hispanic and doing what you do? And when I first met you, I was like, oh, holy shit, it's JD Schulten. And it's through Matt Hildreth and stuff. And you're like totally cool. And so I think that shows about like, you know, like it's good to be able to kind of find competent folks who run, because you did outrun most of the ticket. And you almost won. And we, you know, had the party kind of given more of a shit, like we probably could have ousted Stephen King. But I just want to humble brag on my dad. My dad's an executive at CAF USA. And I remember like one of the first things that he did was he took me out to this farm for this like contractor that was like painting his train cars and stuff. And it was just interesting to show that like the respect that they showed to him, even though they were like super Republican and stuff, and showing that like my dad's company is probably the last thing that's keeping Chemung County alive, other than like a glass factory there. And just watching all these folks and my dad told me in 2016, you know, all these people voted for Trump, but they still love me. And I wonder, like, you know, folks like my dad and stuff, if we were able to kind of build like a better Democratic Party, maybe having an accent would be a thing. It stops you from running for office. Thanks.
Of course.
I hear you that, Paulo. Thank you for sharing that, because I mean, there's a lot of folks that we have that are not just all one way. We know that there's diversity of people, and that's all of our communities we come from. It's just remembering to see the humanity, I think. And with us, as you know, many of us as tribes, we always say we're not Democrat or Republican. We're of our tribal nation, and that's who we look out for. And that's why we do the work. And it's easy to put those labels on, and it's hard to remove them sometimes, and you want to keep them, but the values, it comes back to those values. And I think whatever you show cross-culturally, the values will always be there, to be kind, to be supportive, to be empathetic. going through those same struggles. But I completely identify with that because it's hard for me to say Democrat when our tribes obviously have to work, our communities have to work with everybody.
Exactly. I would like everyone to wrap up by letting folks know where they can find out more about you, like your social media, websites, what have you. And then I guess we only have 5 minutes, so I don't want to get into it. I'll start with you, Janie. But one of the things that I drove earlier this year, I kind of took a COVID. Uh, I went to the Southwest so I could hike because when it's winter in Iowa, you're very limited during COVID and a pandemic what you could do. So I wanted to go outside where I could walk and stuff. And I drove on the interstate through part of Navajo country, and I saw um, Navajos for Trump, and it bothered me to this day that it was still up, and it showed, oh, they're investing in this area. Why aren't we? So we only have 1 minute. I apologize, but
No, I'll be really quick. No,
yeah.
I agree with you. And actually, those were not paid by local people, they were outsiders. But we saw that with an Unflux for the first time on our tribal radio, where everything's in Navajo. We heard those type of ads. So they got in somehow. And there are a few, Navajo Republicans, but it was really extreme, more than we've ever seen before and heard. And yeah, that was very frustrating. And our folks saw that. Where's our Democratic sign when our folks are struggling to get signs and they're making homemade signs and things like that? It's an ongoing battle, but I don't think we're going to be ditching the Democratic Party anytime soon. It's what we're doing today. It's what we're continuing to push for the change all around, internally. And I like that we're of like mind here doing that, and we know the issues.
So I apologize. I ran short here with time. I'm going to put my social media stuff in the chat. I advise everyone else to do so too. Just want to thank everybody for joining this panel. Loved it. Love what you all are doing. Let's continue to push the rural narrative and the importance of that. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with the sign off quite yet, other than just thanking everybody. So, with that, thank you all, and yeah.
JD,
Oh, go ahead.
we can't put it into the chat. The chat's
Yeah,
only for
we
Oh,
audio.
can put it into the public chat. So if
Yeah,
oh,
is it possible that
yeah. Go ahead.
after this you can send all the
yeah.
attendees our information? But
But
if that's possible.
this hasn't
But
been ended
thank
yet.
you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Shakia.
No, I don't. I'm so scared it's gonna cut off. So that's why I keep trying to cut myself off. But thank you everyone for coming. I genuinely appreciate this space and us all being up on a Saturday morning to want to talk about it and really talk about it. I'm excited to build community with Janie and Paulo because we got work to do. And just thank you again. 1,000 Women Strong, 1KWomenStrong.com. And you can find all the links to our social media, ways to donate, ways to get in contact with the organization from there. So thank you all. Have a fantastic day.
Great.
Same for me. Thank you.
Yeah. So you can reach us at the Outrun Co. on social media and the Outrun Coalition on Facebook. We don't have a website yet because we're poor. We don't have money for that. But thank you all for joining us. Our trainings are free. It takes us 2 weeks to set them up, and we've recruited a lot of candidates, and we look forward to turning rural America from red to blue with you.
Right. And if you want to know more about tribes, sorry, I need to put my pitch in there then too. Tribes in rural Arizona, and not just here. I mean, we have tribes all over, but Arizona is where we focus. The Northeast Arizona Native Democrats is the cross coalition effort across county. And then, of course, the group that I'm specifically with is the Navajo County Democrats. But we got 13 tribes in our region.
Fantastic. And I'm not sure what else, but you can follow me at JD Schulten. That's JDSCHOLTEN. Pretty active on Twitter and ruralvote.org. I'm the executive director for American Economics Liberty Project, senior advisor for, and yeah, so I think that's it.
Okay. Do we all leave?